how it's done in practice and some of the new ways we can make using traffic data better. So really excited to walk through that today. A little bit about me. I went to Waterloo for system design and engineering, and after that, I worked at a couple of small consulting firms, and as a developer, and then as a designer, and then I stumbled across Miovision a few years ago, and so based out of Kitchener, and started as a designer, currently a product manager, and my role in a nutshell is to deliver software for cities and engineering firms to analyze traffic data easily. And Miovision overall predominantly turns video into traffic data. That's the sort of main bread and butter that Miovision provides. It is computer vision. So computer vision applied to cameras that converts the camera into traffic data. And we do some further research on the sort of camera side as well. But I'll dig into how we collect traffic data and how that's actually used with cities today. Traffic data can mean a lot of things. This could mean things like travel time from A to B. It could mean the actual data that is your MAC address data from your phones to infer general locations. What we're talking about today in terms of driving the conversation a little bit more meatier to the actual topic is traffic counts. So traffic counts is really about getting quite honestly, a count of your vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians at a given point. So a lot of times cities, what they do is they collect traffic data at a given intersection. So here's an example of an intersection visualization, which would show the vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians flowing through a given intersection. What it indicates, traffic counts particularly, is demand. So doing a count at an intersection tells a city or an engineering firm what the demand is at that intersection for traffic to be flowing through. The primary persona or the user of traffic data or traffic counts particularly is a traffic engineer. So a traffic engineer is using this in a couple of different ways, and that's what we'll sort of walk through today. So there are many ways traffic counts can be used. I'm sure the people at Code for Canada are using traffic counts and a whole bunch of other traffic data for some really exciting stuff. What I'll walk through is three core areas in which traffic data is used today. The first is what's called a traffic impact assessment. So using traffic counts to truly assess the introduction of a new community center or condo or coffee shop within a given city. The other is to retime traffic signals, so to make our traffic lights and pedestrian lights a lot better so we can move quickly and safely. And lastly, evaluating new projects. And so there's a whole ton of different ways in which traffic counts can be used for new projects, and I'll talk through one example just to shed some light on that. So traffic impact assessments. I'll walk through an example in terms of how that works. So Miovision is based out of Kitchener. And here's an intersection based in Kitchener, Belmont, and Glasgow. And let's say a developer for Starbucks comes to Kitchener and says, we want to build a Starbucks here. So once that developer comes through and understands that they want to build something here, they work with a ton of other partners to work on anything from the building, the layout, and one partner that they work with in particular is called an engineering firm. And so an engineering firm, they do, again, a ton of things, but when it comes down to traffic counts particularly, they want to make sure that by introducing this new building, what is the impact to the actual localized network surrounding it. So they'll go out, collect traffic counts in the nearby vicinity, and once they actually do that, they use the demand that's indicated from those traffic counts, and every engineering firm has a manual which sort of displays what are the impacts of new trips that a Starbucks generates. And with that, they're able to sort of flow the traffic data right through the network and then give it to a city. And the city will go about actually approving it or not. And so really that's the sort of flow in terms of it's developer driven, working with an engineering firm, and then making sure that the engineers at the city are able to go about grading whether it's actually successful or not. And if it is, they can go about actually developing it. So this is a process that would be used for condos, coffee shops, community centers. This is a very simplified version, but it starts to get quite complex when you have different driveways, or if you're planning for 5 years from now what the impact is, or 10 years from now, or beyond. And so traffic counts are sort of this sort of backbone behind that. And then from there, traffic engineering firms are able to project those volumes into the future and model that accordingly. So if you're ever wondering, hey, why did that condo get built, or what's happening over there? This is what's actually happening before the shovels get in the ground. The other type is to retime traffic signals. So let's use that example of Belmont and Glasgow. And let's say that on this corridor here, we have a lot of traffic congestion. The way that cities, or a lot of cities in North America, would end up finding out about that is in two general ways. One, someone's complaining. And if someone complains that there is some sort of traffic congestion, that ultimately does get recorded among city officials and members at the city themselves, whether that's taken upon action right away if the traffic lights are out, or if it's just really, really slow, and they'll be able to figure out what the most common complaint intersections are, and those would be retimed. Either that, or if they have a more advanced system, there'd be a reporting mechanism from their advanced traffic management system to tell them that there's actually congestion in this particular area. And so at the end of the day, I would say every 3 to 5 years, depending on which city, has to retime their signals. Because if we're talking 2018, and imagine 3 years from now, if we kept the same traffic light, green, red, walk, don't walk to be the exact same, things wouldn't be that fun. So the idea is they have to do this every so often, and it's either done within the city, or they would actually outsource it to an engineering firm in order to actually facilitate that. 80% of the time, when it comes to collecting traffic counts, is for signal retiming and traffic impact assessments. With that in mind, you have these two main types of projects, and conventionally, how I've just explained them is how it has been done for past 40 to 50 years throughout North America. When it comes to really challenging these conventions, this is where new projects and new pilots become largely effective. I know that Jesse Coleman has presented a bit in the past with respect to the King Street pilot. So the King Street pilot is an example of a new project where they're sort of managing that piece of King Street where only vehicles can go through it, as you all know. And what they have is cameras, permanent cameras at each intersection, and Miovision is actually providing the pedestrian and the vehicle data for them. And so that's an example where using it for that particular pilot, if they have those cameras there and they have a continuous stream of that data, it can help actually inform and challenge the conventions later on for these types of projects. So we'll dig into that a little bit later as well. King Street, of course, you guys have potentially heard of before. I'll walk through another pilot example. Bloor Street bike lanes. So this was something that was done in 2015. Of course, this was just like any other project in any major city, a contentious project. I heard there's a couple folks who are in the software space. Raise your hand. A few of you. Okay, so I know there's this concept of minimum viable product, right? What's the minimum amount of work that can be put into a given project? And once that's out there and into the wild, how can we measure against that? Similar approach to how Bloor Street was ultimately approached. And at the time, the practice of building any sort of public infrastructure was 0 or 1. It was either it would happen or it didn't. So a lot of cities, especially when it came to bike lanes, started to adopt a model that was similar in this nature, so that they could build something that has some sort of separation between vehicles and bikes. Build that infrastructure even if it's, as minimal investment as possible, but at least once that's there, you can have people riding bikes flowing through. And Miovision actually partnered with the city for this particular project. What I'm showing here is simply a snapshot of a collection of points across Bloor Street, and this sort of traffic count graph separated by colors, an indication of times throughout the day that are ultimately showing between the blue vehicles and the pink bikes and the green pedestrians. And so it was this type of data collected, I believe it was 4 different points. It's been a little bit of a while now, but it's been with those points in mind, you can now see what was it in phase 1, what was it in phase 2, and so on. Because at the end of the day, that way you can start to have a more data-driven approach to move these projects along. And according to the City of Toronto report, it had almost a 49% increase overall. So that these sort of new pilots, whether it's for brand new public infrastructure, doing an actual pilot on King Street, it gives cities not only an idea of how to challenge convention with particular projects, but it could extend the way they do their day-to-day projects, like signal retiming, like traffic impact as well. And so with that in mind, when we're talking about the 2 earlier examples I provided, there's clearly limitations. The limitations for signal retiming and traffic impact assessments overall is that it is subject to anomalies. You can only collect as much data as necessary or within budget to make that truly happen. So for a traffic impact assessment or signal retiming project, if a signal retiming project is done every 3 years, on that 3rd-year cycle, only at that point is traffic data truly collected. And when it is collected, then the actual analysis happens. The modeling software would ultimately tell traffic engineers, this should be your new timing plan. These are the new green and red timings. These are the new walk or don't walk timings. And then they go ahead and put that in there. But if it happens to be on a snowy day or on a sunny or a day that had a bad accident, of course there's certain events where if that were the case, the traffic engineer would choose a different day. But the point is the anomaly being that that's still representative of one day. So that limited data that they have at their fingertips is making such an important decision about our traffic signals and the way we actually move. Another piece which is important is that cater to the worst case hour. I'm sure those who are more in the urban planning space have already identified this, and it comes to no surprise with respect to how generally our cities and roads are ultimately built. But this is I'm speaking predominantly with the actual practitioner. This is the practice that ultimately happens, is that if the worst case hour facilitates it, then it will work for the entire day. That's the sort of way it works today. But when you cater to the worst case hour, say it's 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m., it doesn't allow for different insights that happen throughout the middle of the day or throughout any sort of intersection throughout a given city. The last piece here, which is quite important as well, there is little difference in the way the pedestrian and vehicle data is analyzed after it's ultimately counted. So yes, pedestrian data, bicycle data, this has been, of course, counting that data as part of a city or a state or a region's count program is ultimately important, but collection is one thing and analysis is another. And so when it comes to analysis, pedestrian and bike data, putting that through your typical traffic engineer's modeling software doesn't give you the sort of insight, that sort of granularity that a vehicle count would. So those are the couple of setbacks there. So knowing that traffic counts predominantly for those 2 main projects, using it for pilots is excellent because it allows to challenge that convention. How can we sort of deal with these setbacks today? And so there are a couple of ways in which the work that we're doing at Miovision a little bit, but also just generally ways in which we could ultimately make this practice a lot more better for these types of projects, and in turn help us move through our cities easier. One of those ways, and just to sort of pose that question out there, can a traffic engineer make decisions on a more frequent basis? That sort of approach that I've sort of have walked through with those 3 examples is really about collecting data, modeling, and deciding. And so if that practice was there, is there a way we can model better by collecting data a lot more frequent or a lot more often, or potentially make decisions with respect to data collection where we can go directly to deciding? And an example of this could be a signal retiming project. Imagine if you had a lot more data at your fingertips, or a lot more continuous streams of data to ensure that we can make tweaks to our signal times and tweaks to the way an actual traffic light is set up, so that we can continuously improve commutes rather than once every so often. One of those ways that we've been challenging at Miovision today is how can we move from periodic to continuous counting? King Street Pilot's a great example. With those cameras that are there right now, they're able to get a continuous stream of data pretty much every day. And so imagine if you had that continuous stream of data every single day. No longer would it be what's the worst case or peak hour, but what are my worst case scenarios generally? Is Sunday really a busy day that I haven't thought of yet? Is there a game day that I need to consider when the Leafs are playing? Is there something, is it really a fluctuation throughout the day of week? These are the questions that would be immensely valuable to a traffic engineer, because you can imagine if they have that much more data, you can imagine what it comes to deploying a timing plan to a signal or a traffic light generally, you would be able to see a lot more adaptive results to help you move through your city better. And of course, when it comes to whether it's if the data has been busy or not, just generally answering those questions that they never had before. An interesting piece as well, which extends beyond the traffic engineer to planning, is ultimately having that continuous stream. You could actually answer planning related questions. What's the growth been over time? No longer am I relying on 2012 and 2014 and 2016 data. I now have a continuous stream to tell me how has traffic grown or declined over that time, and what % of growth should I utilize in those traffic models. Here's an example of Belmont and Glasgow, that same intersection I was showing earlier. And this is the sort of practice where using those traffic data, particularly, they'd be able to filter by date range, time of day, and then show what the high-level insights are for that particular day. And not only that, but if they have a range in mind, sort of typify it over the entire day that is representative of that date range. Just an example of what we provide for cities today. The other, of course, is focusing more on vehicle to pedestrian centered analysis. Speaking earlier to the traffic impact assessment example, that was a method where you use traffic data, find out how it flows through the actual network, and make that decision from there. This is all based off of a traffic impact assessment guideline. There's a guideline that's provided. Each city sort of comes up with it, and it's really trying to figure out, well, if a condo or a community center or a coffee shop gets approved because the vehicles flow better, how can we challenge that convention to make sure it's better for pedestrians and cyclists and anyone who doesn't use a car? So questions that they could ultimately use, which is actually coming into practice by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, hopefully in the next couple of years or so, is to provide a grade or a level of service that would allow to answer those questions like, well, how far is that Starbucks to a bus stop? How far is it with respect to, like, if I wanted to cross an intersection, is it safe for me to do so? Are the sidewalks large enough? And of course, this would change depending on whether it's a Starbucks or a community center, because the community center may demand much higher rate to make that happen. Someone mentioned there from York region. York region actually is one of the forward-thinking regions in the area where their new traffic impact assessment guidelines actually mandates this. So we have a couple of cities throughout North America cropping up that are just trying to be a little more forward thinking to make sure it's safer for not only vehicles, but also non-motorized methods of commutes as well. And lastly, safety performance. So moving forward from the vehicle to pedestrian-centered approach is really thinking about not only has an accident happened at this intersection, but is there a potential where an accident could happen? And this is where extending beyond traffic data per se, depending on how that's actually calculated, that's another method of research that is being looked at right now with camera-based detection. So is there a way we can figure out how quickly or how often or how what the sort of confidence is that an accident could happen here? That way, you're not just relying on the data point of ensuring that those that have the highest accident numbers are being prioritized, but also looking at potential for conflict as well. And so this is a little bit further into the camera detection domain, but is a way that sort of challenges the convention to make sure that traffic engineers, those who are really figuring out the nuances of how we flow through our city, are well aware of what ultimately happens as we pass through them and adapt their timing plans to make sure it ultimately facilitates that. So all in all, traffic data, 80% of the time, signal retiming and traffic impact assessments. The methods that I explained with the traffic impact assessment and signal retiming projects, they're not perfect, but they are the common practice, which happens today at cities. And I think as shown with the example of the Bloor Street bike lane and the King Street pilot, ongoing data collection, these sort of pilots allow us not only challenge, we'll figure out what the goal of that pilot is, but allows us to also challenge the sort of status quo that could allow cities to retime their signals more often and make commutes better for all of us. That's it. Thank you. Jody, is there time for questions? Or there's time for questions? Maybe like a couple. Okay, we'll take a couple, and then I'm here afterwards for a bit anyways. Any questions? Yes.
So you mentioned that you're taking this from cameras. Have you considered taking it from multiple other sources?
Yeah.
Like satellite images, providing sometimes every 5 minutes. You have Google with their Android phones and all of these things. Other cities I know, they do all of these things. So do you collect from all of those providers?
Miovision doesn't, but we have done a couple of initial sort of research projects in terms of fusing other data sets together. The goal with traffic counts particularly, and the reason why I say that is with traffic engineers are a lot more focused on how does this help me retime signals? How can I retime signals better? But you're absolutely right. Passive data, Google data, location-based data is used today. It is more widely accepted from a sort of planning level. It has yet to be seen too much in practice. We have a couple of sort of research projects in that sort of domain, but not currently for signal retiming. But it is a very good point that it's not that cities ignore that data. They are using it, but they're using it in certain verticals. Hasn't really widely reached the traffic engineering domain. Question? Yes.
I seem to have the idea that late at night, when traffic is not heavy.
Right.
It's at the intersection. And if you are alone there, facing a red light, it would sense you and maybe cut short the treatment of light in between. Is that true?
Yeah, it really depends.
Real time.
Yeah, so it really depends on the type of intersection, and that's actually a really good point. You have the sort of version 1 of traffic lights, which are, okay, here's a deployed timing plan, and it's going to change every X seconds, and it isn't touched for years. That's the version 1. Version 2 would be adaptive based off of different times of days. That's the most common how it is right now, which is, it will have a certain timing plan, but if a pedestrian presses the button, then it would prioritize the pedestrian, start to dwindle down the vehicle ones and pass through. I'm not sure if you had pressed the button or if you were just standing
No,
there.
I mean, I'm a driver, I'm just sitting in the car waiting. Facing the red light.
Oh, yeah.
Under those situations, the red light sends you, well, there's no park around.
Yeah. And so that is more of,
Short between you.
yep, and so that would classify as an adaptive intersection. There's a detector either on the ground, there's camera-based detectors as well, and then that would activate and sort of change the time plan accordingly. So yes, it's true. I'll take one last one. Okay, yes?
For your traditional traffic impact assessment, mode shares and like pedestrian vehicle interactions, those aren't typically measured, right?
So with respect to mode shares, it's usually captured in the actual count. But in terms of where it's introduced in the actual assessment overall, the counts obviously they're going through the actual modeling and figuring out what the general timing plan is. A lot of traffic impact assessment requirements, so for a new condo or whatever that might be, is really talking about, oh, we noticed there is a demand here, and so the TIA guideline, impact assessment guideline, would simply say provide suggestions for the developer, provide suggestions just generally in terms of how this is still being able to facilitate this influx of demand. But so it's really treated differently, which goes back to one of the setbacks, is just for when it comes to vehicles, it's really just collect and model, and you have a whole full analysis on it. When it comes to pedestrians and bikes, there's really only a couple suggestions. But as I mentioned, depending on what region, as you might know in your space as well, for future projects in your region at least, it must have that demand where you have to figure out, well, is it near this bus stop? Is it near this sort of transit way? Because that has another grade. How they weigh it, it's going to be different from region to region. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll hand the mic back to you.
I can do it. Don't worry. Sorry, I still hear us.
All right, thank you. So now we have some time for announcements. I can have like 30 seconds if you'd like to say something. It's not project pitches yet, but does anyone have anything you'd like to share? All right, sure.
I always have announcements. I didn't put it up here, sorry. Where do I find that?
Link.civictech.ca/pitches.
/pitch. Oh, it's the pitch doc. Okay.
/announcements
Or
/.
slash. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so who has ever been frustrated by the blue bin recycling program in the city of Toronto? Yeah. As in, who's ever been confused about what to put in the blue bin? Thank you. Yeah. Are you a bad recycler? Sometimes. Okay. So Civic Toronto is working with the city of Toronto, particularly the solid waste team, to hold a design workshop where we want to work with residents, engage residents in what are your challenges and your frustrations around the Blue Bin program. So it's a Blue Bin design sprint. It's happening on November 9th in the morning as part of the National Zero Waste Conference. It's open to the public, it's free, and there will be food. So we're supporting the city of Toronto and putting this on, bringing a kind of design thinking lens to this challenge of blue bin contamination, which is a huge problem. But it's like, how do we engage residents in this and understand why people behave the way they do around this, which hasn't happened enough. So that's happening on November 9th. And next week, Howard Tam and I from Civic Tech Toronto are going to host a little focus group for an hour. We'll do a breakout at this point next week at hacknight. And so we are looking for people to sign up to talk to us about their behaviors, their frustrations, their ideas around why you raised your hand there. So focus group next week at hacknight, and then November 9th, mark your calendar if you feel like coming out in the morning. I think that's all I have to say. Where is it? Okay, so time 9 to 12, November 9th. could be 9 to 1, I can't remember exactly, but definitely 9 to 12. And it's at the Symes, SYMES. So I'll post on the Slack about this. The Symes is in the Junction. And yeah, I'll share info and a link to the Eventbrite. But November 9th, 9 to 12. And then next week, focus group during hacknight. Any questions? Sweet, thanks.
I'm really sorry that I didn't write this because I strongly promote writing these, but I don't actually have a link to share yet. So I wanted to let you guys know that 4 people from Civic Tech applied to the position that I talked about last week. Oh, by the way, my name's Raphael. I work for the City of Toronto. I'm a project lead in the Big Data Innovation Team in Transportation. We are a client of Miovision. So if you found Miovision's presentation super interesting, you want to do cool work with the data that they produce, as well as other data sources that we have, we hopefully this week will be posting 2 research analyst 1 positions. So not an intern position, more of a recent grad, recent post-grad position, but figured since you're here, you just heard Miovision, you were like, cool, keep it locked. I'll post it on the Civic Tech Slack, so join that, and it will eventually be here. And so feel free to talk to me if you want to know more.
I have an announcement. Someone else have an announcement? Okay, after me. So Civic Tech Toronto is run by volunteers, and we have a meeting coming up next Monday, October 22nd. We did reschedule it. It is next Monday, not yesterday, so don't worry, you didn't miss it. Shoot darn. So yeah, come on out to Brookfield Institute at 6:30 p.m. That is at 20 Dundas Street, I think, 9th floor. And yeah, more details will be on #general probably in Slack, and we hope to see people there.
Hi, you already heard that we are Code for Canada Fellows, and we would like your help with doing some user testing. So this week we're doing a sprint working to improve a Transport Canada tool. You can drop by meeting room 4 down the hall there. If you're interested in seeing what user research looks like and contributing to a more user-friendly experience for drone users. We also have treats, vegan and not allergy friendly. We also have, if you have less time, we also have some other activities, ideation stuff like sharing your favorite apps with maps. Is there anything else? Did I miss anything?
It would be really helpful if you could come user test with us. We really would appreciate that.
Oh yeah, and we have a sign up sheet, and if you sign up for a later slot, we can Slack you if you want to go do something else while you wait. Hope to see you there. Yay!
Any government folks in the room? Cool. So has anybody heard of Taiwan's PIS? It's, okay, so it's basically their digital ministry, digital lab, innovation lab. That's like they're not actually a ministry. So they like are exactly on the margin of like the government and their public society, and they do a lot of like participatory democracy initiatives, a lot of open consultation processes and things like that have come out of it. Super exciting stuff. I can talk more, but in the interest of time. So they're on their way to Ottawa for the FWT next month, but before that they're stopping off in Toronto to provide training. Basically, it's like they're able to host a workshop I'm happy helping host them. There's going to be community organization reps, advocacy organizations. There will also be like a camp for like civil servants. Check out the Eventbrite link. It's the hope is that like we're able to like, kind of like hear from you in the process of like soliciting people's participation, like what you might find useful in the workshop, and kind of use that to design the workshop itself as well. So anyway, I'm going to be leading one-on-one later, so I won't be able to speak directly, but Slack me if you have any questions. I'm at Alex Jay on the Civic side. Hello.
Can we invite our governmenty friends?
Yes, please invite governmenty friends. Yeah, if you're a community organization, please do talk to me. Right now, we just want to make sure that also like people that are not very often found in these civic tech events, make sure to get brought into the fold. So we're doing more focused outreach there, but it's an open solicitation call for civil servants specifically.
It's another announcement, I'm sorry.
I also forgot to write this one. So, somewhat related to the previous announcement, the Big Data Innovation Team has been responsible for monitoring the performance of the King Street Transit Pilot. Has anyone heard of the King Street Transit Pilot?
What's that?
It's a transportation project to discourage through traffic on King, which is the busiest streetcar route in the city, so that people riding the streetcar can ride so more reliably and fastly. So we finally have released the data sets that we've been using to produce the public dashboard format dashboards, aka PDFs, that you may or may not have seen on the City of Toronto's website. They're really beautifully designed, but yes, they are PDFs. So finally the data is out. We have the aggregate kind of summary data and then the disaggregate data. And some company called Miovision is providing the volume data. So if you actually want to look at data that they produce, there it is. So I will write the link to all of the data sets somewhere, sorry.